Vinyl plank and laminate click-together flooring. This is a Lawson product. It is a luxury vinyl plank. It has a pad pre-attached to it. You can see that's on the bottom. It kind of looks like laminate. It has the same kind of click-together mechanism, but it is vinyl through and through. There is no particle board. It clicks together just like laminate. Tongue side, groove side go together and lock in place. You attach it the same way you do laminate, which I'm going to go over the steps, the tips and tricks on how to do this quickly and correctly so that you're not damaging it and you're getting a good tight fit all the way through. This is a large room. This room is a little over 25 feet by 40 feet, which is the maximum you can have this specific manufacturer's flooring without needing a transition strip. Basically, if your room is larger than that, you've got to put a joint so that the two floors can move independently of each other. This is a floating floor like all laminates. It does not get attached. It does not get glued down. You do not butt it up all the way against the wall. So the first step when you're laying out your floor is you're going to want to run one row of your planks. This goes for laminate or vinyl. You run one row. You just click them all together, get them about as close as you can because you're not going to have anything else to kind of keep them together. And just look at your wall. This wall here was within specifications for how far it could stick out and our shoe molding to still cover it. That would be quarter round or whatever you might put on it. So it needs on this distance at least 3/8 of a gap from the wall, and the quarter round is going to be 3/4 inch quarter round. So we've got anywhere from 5/8 to 3/8 that we can play with. When you put your first row up against the wall, you're going to want to either take a laser, which is pretty easy, or a string level in another person, or a screw or nail in the opposite wall, and you're going to want to stretch out your string from point A to point B, and you're going to want to see how off your wall is, because you can put the planks together and they might look straight, but if you look down the row you might notice, oh wait, my planks are going kind of zigzag. You do not want to install your planks zigzag. They might all click together the first couple of rows, but pretty soon throughout the floor you'll have a wave going. Now that's exaggerated, but that's what will be happening. And so when you try to join planks together, you're going to be struggling. You'll be pushing the planks together really, really hard, trying to get them to snap because they're not straight. Your installation is going to go way, way easier. You will not struggle with it as long as you maintain your planks in a perfectly straight line. So the first thing you do is you see how straight or crooked your wall is. If your wall is not within the required distances of the manufacturer so that this floor can expand and contract and move freely, then you're going to need to cut that first row. Basically, you're going to have to scribe the wall to the plank, which is fairly easy. You just get your distance with your string level or your laser, and you shine it across or you pull it out, and then you measure from the wall, and you get your plank to the what would be called the least common denominator. Basically, whatever the minimum distance you can have the plank for the entire way without touching the wall and keeping your plank straight, that's where you want to put your first plank and all the planks afterwards. Then you're going to come back and you're going to take a pencil and you're going to put your pencil down with a block, maybe a 1/2 inch block or so with 3/8 to your baseboard or your wall. You put your pencil on it and you drag the wall, and it will scribe a mark down your planks. All the zigs and zags, it'll scribe a mark all the way down on top of your planks. You pull all those planks up, you keep them in order, you cut them with your jigsaw, you put them all back down, and it will be the perfect spacing, 3/8 or so away from the wall, all the way down. but you have to make sure that your planks were perfectly straight when you did the scribing, or else you're going to have a zigzag going across your floor and it's going to make everything more difficult. To help with that, you can attach 2 rows together without really locking them down. The second row will give the first row a little bit of rigidity. It might take a little bit more time, but you'll ensure that you can get a more perfect and straight line that way. But that's number one thing you've got to do is make sure that you're maintaining a straight line all the way down. That I see that as the problem with floors pulling apart and having issues more than anything else, is that the planks were not well attached because they did not do the prep work necessary to make sure that the first, second, third rows were going perfectly straight. Once you've done that, then you're going to have to come back and put shims up against your wall wherever they're needed, all along the wall. About every 4 feet. We've removed a lot of the shims because we've gotten most of the flooring done. So you're going to want to put shims because as you are blocking or putting more pieces, you're shoving them in together, the planks are going to move on you. So if you do not shim well up against that wall, when you start putting more and more rows, it's going to move your flooring. So once you've got your first 2 or 3 rows down, you're going to want to check again. Pull out your string, pull it nice and taut, see if there's any waviness in the floor. Because once you get past about 3 or 4 rows, I mean maybe a little bit more depending on how heavy it is, it makes it a lot more difficult to adjust the floor. When there's only 2 or 3 rows, it's easy to push the row in a little bit or pull it out. Now it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. There is going to be some variation. You're not going to get your line perfect, but it's going to be pretty close. It's going to be within 1/4 of an inch throughout the entire run on, say, a 40-foot run like this. So you do not want more than 1/4 inch variation, because once you start getting a variation to the floor, like I said, you're going to have a struggle pushing them together. And let me grab a plank and I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about in case you've never put one of these floors together. All right, so this goes with all laminate or plank floors. Okay, now these are cut off ends. But basically these 2 ends would join together. There would be a tongue on this side, the groove on this side, or tongue on this side, groove on this side. And so if these 2 panels are twisted a little bit, now this is an exaggeration, but more or less this is what will happen on your floor. You didn't get your walls perfect, so you've got a closed end on this side. They're butted up really tight here, but there's a little bit of a gap on this side because you're not perfectly straight. Well, not only does that mess this joint up so it's not strong, but the next joint that tries to go into it, when it tries to feed in, it's not going to be able to feed in at that small little crack. And so you can shove it in and you can bend the plank and hit it with a mallet on this side and force it into place. And I see that a lot where it looks kind of okay. You can't really notice from a distance. After time, those planks will slowly pull apart. Because you don't have it tight here, you're not going to have it tight here. If at any place along the plank it is not joined tightly to the preceding planks, it's not going to last. So you can see right here, perfectly joined together, perfectly joined together, perfectly joined together. There is no open. That's because the whole floor is all perfectly in line. I know because I checked it a couple of times with the laser, making sure that it's totally straight. So that is probably the number one thing that you've got to do. You got to use shims up against your wall. You got to use either a string level or a laser to get your floor perfectly straight. And then the next thing as far as installing them actually that I see done poorly is people just tapping on the face of the boards. So each brand is going to be a little bit different as far as how hardy the face of it is. This brand in particular is very touchy. If you were to take a block like this, okay, this is just a cutoff. This is the tongue side, that's the groove side. and you were to put this in just like so and use this as your tapping block and start tapping, this will get destroyed, and it puts only a small amount of pressure from the hammer on one spot, and it will pick up on this side and it can break the edge of the panel you're whacking into. For this panel, this specific plank, I found the only way that I can make sure that the board is not damaged by anything is to lay this piece in there so that it's nice and tight, put my pole bar on it so that it's flat and distributing pressure, and then I hammer right here. That way it's distributing even pressure across this board, which puts even pressure on this one to hammer it in so that it's nice and flat and flush into the next board. Some laminates are 12 millimeters or so. They're really beefy. They can take a lot more abuse, and you can use a little plastic block that you can buy that has a little bit of a lip, way smaller than this metal pull bar. And it just goes onto the end, you whack it, it's great, super easy, no problem. You just need to test out whatever you're using. The cheaper it is, or the thinner the material, the more likely it is to bubble and crack when it is being hammered in. So use a piece of the material itself. That works a lot of times really well because it's distributing pressure across the entire face. So that method works really well. Or using that plastic block I was talking about, you can buy and get a whole kit that includes the bar, the block, and spacers. Now, as far as time-saving tips, what I do is I don't attach each individual plank as I go. I don't put that one down and hammer it into place, and then go to the next one and hammer it into place, and then go to the next one, hammer it into place. I do a staggered method. And what I'm doing here is I start off by, and it doesn't matter where you start, at the wall or anywhere. And so I've gotten this one hammered in nice and flat. Yeah, let me see if I can show you kind of better what I'm talking about. This one's not connected. Neither is that one, neither is that one, neither is that one or that one. It's zigzagged all the way back to the wall. So these have yet to be joined together in a zigzag pattern all the way up to here. Now the reason why I do that is because I can click them all into place. I get them close so that they are almost touching. And then preceding plank, or the plank afterward, is holding it in alignment. So when I go to tap, I don't need to be over here making sure it's aligned. This makes it into a one-person job to install this floor. I don't have to align each plank because each plank that's following is keeping it aligned. So all I have to do is come over here, put my block down, and hammer until this one's seated, and I'll know that this one gets seated because that one will more than likely seat first. Now, it doesn't really matter, but you do have to check, because if this one pops together first, it's going to keep on going till that one pops. So I never go beyond 2 planks that have not been fit together. Like, I won't do an entire row, even though I could keep on going and build this out. I'm not going to hammer on more than 2 of these planks at a time. If this was a thicker laminate, say 12 millimeter, you could potentially do that because it's so thick, it can handle multiple rows. But also, even in that, some of them have a very smooth finish to them and they slide and click together very easily. Others are not quite as well milled, and so you have to test this out with each one. But for this, 2 of them click together very nicely. Saves me a lot of time because I don't have to individually try to align and place each piece. So I'll go back and I'll hit these 2 together, make sure they're good. I'll go to this row, I'll hit these 2 together, make sure they're good. Go to this row and this row and this row, so forth, all the way back to here. And then I will basically start the process over again, going down there, building out a couple of rows, coming all the way back to here, and I'll start the process over again. So I'll do this pyramid effect all the way across. So I'm not doing one row at a time. I'm doing about eight or more rows at a time. So that will save you a lot of time, especially if you're working by yourself, because the way I used to do it is I used to basically set a plank down. I'd put my foot on a piece that was locked in to this one to keep it aligned. I'd be down here and I'd be hammering it in. And if you've ever done it that way, that just takes a lot of time. This way will ensure that all the pieces get put together nicely, that they click together, they're all in alignment, and only one person can be just hammering it all and placing all the planks together. Of course, if there's two of you, one guy can be going in front of you. After you do one row, he'll just go and put a couple more, so you can be hammering, the other guy's placing planks. It goes really quickly. But I really want you to pay attention to how all of the planks are perfectly aligned. There aren't any gaps. That will show you that the flooring has been properly installed when there are no gaps. If there are gaps, that means that the planks are crooked, that they are zigzagging in and out. Now, you also see this black underlayment, which I've not gone over. This is a concrete floor, and this specific manufacturer wants a vapor barrier. This is 6 mil, which is, let's see, 6/1000th of an inch, I believe. So this is fairly thick plastic. You can do clear or black. Prefer black just because it is easier to see when you get a tear in it. So yeah, 6 mil black plastic underneath this specific manufacturer's flooring. Check with the manufacturer to see what they might require. This flooring is waterproof, so I don't personally know why they want a 6 mil underlayment, except for if you had a ton of water trying to come up through your concrete foundation, it wouldn't reach the plank and there wouldn't be any mold, I suppose, but it's still gonna be hitting the plastic, so yeah. Anyways, follow whatever the manufacturer says. Trying to think if there's anything more. I know I've talked a lot, but I'm trying to give emphasis on important things to do. You don't want to damage the face of your planks. You want to make sure they're joined together. Got to make sure your rows stay straight, which they will. As long as your first few rows are straight, the rest will remain straight. Unless it's a cheap product and not well made, the rest of it's going to go together really easily. Other thing is you got to watch for patterns, because these floors are printed. They have repeating patterns. They'll reverse an image, they'll move an image, and you can see right here, you know, we've got two of the same things right next to each other. I try not to do that. It's hard to do because, I mean, when you're laying this many planks, it's kind of bound to happen, but you try to keep images away from each other. So yeah, you can see in this cluster right here, we've got repeating images. Throughout the floor, you really want to try to stagger that. Now, most people will never notice those kinds of things, but if you get multiple rows on alignment that all have the same image, it can become very obvious. So stagger out your designs. As far as your shims, you only need to put shims up against walls where pressure is being applied. So I'm hammering this way, so shims go on this side. I don't have to put shims on that side because I'm not hammering that direction. Also, these shims are useless at this point because the floor is so heavy, it's not going to move that way. Now, it potentially could if you start hammering this way, but you should never have to hammer a plank onto another plank. That means there's either debris between the tongue and the groove, or your row isn't straight, and so you're having to apply way too much pressure. You should just be able to push them into position kind of at a 45-degree angle and lock them in place. All right, well, that's it for installing these. Laminate, I typically use a circular saw to cut them. I just have my speed square and I just cut, and every row or several rows I will just sweep the dust off so it doesn't get into any of the cracks, or I'll have a specific place that I'm cutting. With this stuff, the nice thing about it is you literally score the face of it with a box knife, as long as that's sharp. So I just use the guide of the speed square and the knife, score it along the speed square, and then flip it over, crack it in half, cut the underlayment. It's just kind of like drywall. So this stuff is really easy to cut, no dust, no mess, and yeah, you just keep on going. Okay, hopefully this has been helpful and will assist you in your project for laying down a laminate or vinyl plank click together floor.